Mayday, Mayday! This is Alara Vance on Mindoir. We are under attack. They came out of nowhere. They're rounding us up like cattle. Please, if anyone can hear this...
They say history is written by the victors. A charming sentiment, but incomplete. History is written by those who survive. And when an empire built on paranoia and hate finally chokes on its own poison, there are very few survivors left to tell the tale. The official records will call the Batarian Hegemony a rogue state, a slaver empire, a galactic pariah. All true, but insufficient. They weren't just villains. They were strategists. And their greatest strategic decision was to ensure their own extinction. To understand the hegemony, you must first understand their homeworld, Khar'shan. My data streams paint a picture of a world wrapped not in mystery, but in carefully constructed lies. Propaganda claims a population of 15 billion, an economy to rival the Asari. The truth, as always, is less impressive. Citadel sanctions have left them a paper tiger of an empire, one that fights its battles with deniable terrorists, rather than the grand fleets of its history. Khar'shan is the heart of a totalitarian police state. The hegemony's Department of Information Control is absolute. Every piece of data entering or leaving their systems is filtered, sanitized, and weaponized. The only news their citizens receive is the outrageous propaganda the regime produces. Dissent is not tolerated. It is surgically removed. Compliance is rewarded. This is the foundation of their society. Control. And that control is built upon a rigid caste system, with slavery as its cornerstone. To the hegemony, the Council's anti-slavery laws are not a moral imperative. They are a form of cultural prejudice. This isn't the opportunistic slaving you see from gangs on Omega. This is an integral structural component of their civilization, as fundamental to them as the Citadel is to the Council. It is a practice so deeply ingrained that many Batarians who flee the hegemony for the Terminus systems simply continue it, forming the slaver rings feared by colonists across the Traverse. Their entire social structure is built on the concept of station. To accuse a Batarian of worthlessness is a mortal insult. To speak above one's station is a grave offense, even among their criminal elements. But the most potent tool in the hegemony's arsenal is xenophobia, a deep, abiding paranoia of all other species. They believe that species with fewer than 4 eyes are inherently less intelligent. Think about that. Every negotiation, every diplomatic encounter, every conversation they have with a human, a Solarian, an Asari, it begins from a place of contempt. They communicate with a complex system of body language. A head tilted left shows deference and admiration. Tilted right shows confidence and superiority. Imagine their constant, simmering frustration when dealing with races who don't even know the rules of the conversation. Every interaction is an affirmation of their own superiority and the galaxy's ignorance. This combination, absolute state control, a caste system built on slavery, and a profound sense of cultural and biological superiority, creates a dangerous worldview. They see themselves as the rightful masters of their corner of the galaxy, perpetually victimized by lesser species who refuse to acknowledge their greatness. They see slights where there are none, and conspiracies in every shadow. They are an empire with a persecution complex. And then, humanity arrived, the ultimate validation of all their fears. The year is 2160. The Systems Alliance, the brash, ambitious newcomers to the Galactic stage, begin aggressive colonization of the Skyllian Verge. To the Alliance, its unclaimed territory, a new frontier ripe for expansion, a chance to secure resources and establish a foothold. To the Batarians, who had been slowly developing the region for decades, it is an invasion. They see humanity's rapid expansion not as progress, but as theft. They had claimed this territory. In their minds, they had called dibs on an enormous swath of space, and these two-eyed upstarts were ignoring the unspoken rules of the galaxy. A childish notion, perhaps, but one they held with religious conviction. For over 300 years, they had the FTL capability to properly settle the Verge, but they preferred preying on others to building something new. Their few colonies were nothing compared to their ambitions. Humanity, desperate for space, did in years what the Batarians had failed to do in centuries. So, in 2171, they tried to play by the Council's rules. They petitioned the Citadel Council to declare the Verge a zone of Batarian interest, effectively demanding the galaxy's governing body halt human colonization and recognize Batarian sovereignty over the entire region. It was a test, a demand for respect. The Council refused. From the Council's perspective, the decision was simple geopolitics. The Batarians were a stagnant, isolationist problem, a totalitarian slaver state that was more nuisance than threat. Humanity was a dynamic, rising power, a perfect buffer state, and a potential new partner to keep the Terminus systems in check. The Council didn't care about Batarian claims. They cared about stability and power. They declared the unsettled worlds of the Verge open to anyone. To the Hegemony, this was the ultimate betrayal. The Council they had been a part of for over 2 millennia had sided with a species that had only been on the scene for a few decades. They were overlooked, discarded, humiliated. This is the moment that defines modern Batarian history. The public record states that in protest, the Batarians closed their Citadel embassy, severed all diplomatic ties, and retreated into isolation, an act of galactic petulance, a government taking its ball and going home. My network sees it differently. This was not a retreat, it was a declaration of war. By closing their embassy, the Hegemony was not isolating themselves from the galaxy, they were freeing themselves from its laws. No council oversight, no diplomatic consequences, no rules of engagement. They had just unshackled themselves, giving them the freedom to prosecute their war against humanity by any means necessary. It was a calculated, geopolitical gambit, and the first targets would be the colonists, people like Ilara Vance. An open war with the Alliance was a war the Hegemony could not win. Their military was a paper tiger, designed for internal suppression, not a sustained interstellar campaign. So they turned to their greatest asset, the lawless expanse of the Terminus systems. The Hegemony began funneling weapons, credits, and intelligence to the criminal underworld. Pirate gangs, slaver syndicates, mercenary outfits, they all became deniable assets in the Hegemony's shadow war. The attacks were brutal and relentless. Small colonies, outposts on the fringe, places like Mindoir, places where a few transports could land, inflict maximum terror, and vanish back into the dark. For every official report of a pirate raid, my agents filed 10 confirming Batarian funding and coordination. For a certain Commander Shepard, the raid on Mindoir wasn't just a statistic, it was the day their family was slaughtered and their home burned to the ground, a personal introduction to the Hegemony's methods. The most infamous of these proxy groups was the Blue Suns. While officially founded by the human Zaid Masani and Vito Santiago, their operations were heavily funded by Batarian interests. Vito even installed a Batarian, Solam Dalzara, as a puppet leader, a public face to placate his backers and draw attention away from himself. It was a perfect arrangement. The Blue Suns provided the muscle, a mix of Batarian, Turian, and human mercs, and the Hegemony provided the political cover and the cash. This shadow war reached its apex in 2176 with the Skyllian Blitz. This was no mere raid, it was a coordinated, multi-front military offensive. A massive coalition of pirates, slavers, and mercenaries, all armed and directed by the Hegemony, launched an all-out assault on Elysium, the human capital in the Skyllian Verge. It was intended to be a decisive blow, to shatter human morale and drive them from the Verge forever. It failed. The Alliance military alongside local civilian militias held the line. For a different Commander Shepard, it was the battle that made them a war hero, rallying the defenders and holding the line against impossible odds. The Alliance, now fully aware of the Hegemony's hand in the conflict, decided it was time to retaliate. Their target, the moon of Torfan, a notorious staging ground for the Hegemony's criminal proxies. The Alliance fleet hammered the surface, but the main slaver base was miles underground, untouchable from orbit. A ground assault was required. The fighting was a vicious, close-quarters meat grinder. For yet another version of Commander Shepard, this was the battle that earned them the moniker the Butcher of Torfan. They led an elite ground team into the heart of the base. The cost was staggering, nearly 3/4 of their squad perished. But the mission was a success. Not a single slaver made it out alive. Some reports in my network even suggest Shepard executed surrendering combatants. A war crime? Perhaps. Under Citadel law, almost certainly. But the targets were not soldiers of a recognized state, they were slavers and terrorists. The Alliance Admiralty looked the other way. They were more interested in the message it sent, a clear, bloody message to the Hegemony: the proxy war was over. From now on, the Alliance would strike back, and strike back hard. The Hegemony got the message. They pulled back their assets, retreating deeper into their own systems. But their ideology remained. Their hatred of humanity only intensified, festering in the dark. All they needed was a new weapon, a true believer, willing to go further than any pirate lord. They found him in a man named Balak. In 2183, Balak and his cell of extremists hijacked asteroid X-57, a mining operation in the Asgard system. Their plan was simple and genocidal. Using the asteroid's own fusion torches, they would accelerate it on a collision course with the human colony of Terra Nova. 4 million colonists, an extinction-level event. When Commander Shepard confronts him, Balak doesn't hide behind politics. He is the pure, undiluted expression of the Hegemony's doctrine. He spits his justification with absolute conviction.
You humans. You're almost more trouble than you're worth.
A blight, a plague. That is how he sees humanity. He is not a mercenary fighting for credits. He is a crusader fighting a holy war. He frames his act of terrorism as righteous retribution for the siege of Torfan and the loss of the Skyllian Verge. He is the Hegemony's anger given form. And when Shepard corners him, he reveals the final, cruel logic of his philosophy. He rigs explosives to kill the surviving human engineers, forcing Shepard to choose between justice and innocent lives. Whether Shepard lets him go to save the hostages or sacrifices them to bring him down, the lesson is the same. The Hegemony has cultivated a generation of fanatics, men like Balak, who believe that any atrocity is justified in the service of their cause. But even in the most monolithic of empires, there are cracks.
Broker, this is Nightingale. I have an update from the Citadel refugee camps. Report. It's the Batarians, the ones who escaped Khar'shan. They're different. The Hegemony's gone, and it's like a spell has been broken. I'm hearing words I've never associated with their species before. Brotherhood, cooperation. They're shell-shocked, but they're working together. Not just with each other, but with Turians, Solarians, even humans.
The state propaganda has worn off. What is the prevailing sentiment?
Regret. A lot of regret. They see now. They see what the hegemony's isolationism cost them. They had no allies, no one to call when the sky fell. They know they were led to their own slaughter.
A sobering realization. Keep monitoring their leadership vacuum. A new government may rise from these ashes. I want to know who and what they believe.
Understood, broker. Nightingale out.
The hegemony presented a united front to the galaxy, a species unified in its xenophobia and devotion to the state. It was a lie, of course. No empire is a monolith. My agent Nightingale's report confirms what my network has suspected for years. Away from the iron grip of the state, Batarians are not inherently evil, they are simply people. The refugees fleeing the fall of Khar'shan are the ultimate proof. Stripped of their government, their propaganda, their rigid caste system, they are forced to confront the truth of their situation. The devastation has changed them. They are no longer agents of a hostile power, but survivors. And in that survival they have found a common cause with the very species they were taught to despise. This isn't a new phenomenon. For decades, Batarians have been fleeing the oppressive hegemony to carve out a life in the Terminus systems. While many fall into the familiar patterns of piracy and slaving, others simply seek freedom. They become mercenaries, merchants, mechanics, individuals, not extensions of the state. You see them in the Blue Suns, fighting alongside the humans and Turians they're supposed to hate, taking orders from a human leader. Why? Because a paycheck is a more honest master than a government that feeds you lies. The hegemony's greatest fear was never the Alliance military. It was the thought that their own people might one day see the galaxy not as a collection of threats, but as a community they could be a part of, that they might reject the state's narrative of grievance and victimhood. The Reapers, in their own horrific way, made that fear a reality. By destroying the hegemony, they freed the Batarian people, but that freedom came at a terrible price. The Reapers arrived in Batarian space first. The Velar system was the first to go dark. The hegemony's Department of Information Control, in a final pathetic act of denial, blamed the communications blackout on space weather. Within a day, the Reaper fleet was in orbit over Khar'shan itself. The response was exactly what you would expect from a paranoid, dysfunctional state: uncoordinated, chaotic. As the information minister announced that unknown ships were destroying all space traffic, the defense minister declared there was no reason to panic. Then the planet's comm buoys were destroyed, and Khar'shan fell silent. The hegemony's grand strategy, its century of burning bridges, its isolationism, its proxy wars, had led directly to this moment. They had made enemies of everyone. They had rejected the galactic community. And so when the Reapers came, no one answered their calls for help, because there was no one left to call. As Khar'shan burned, a wave of terror washed over their colonies. Evacuations began. So many refugees poured into the human-controlled Exodus cluster that Alliance officials initially mistook it for a full-scale invasion. Then, one by one, the other Batarian systems went dark. Millions, perhaps billions, trapped on their worlds, waiting for the harvest. Their proud empire, which they believed could stand alone against the galaxy, was annihilated in a matter of days, unassisted, unmourned. The hegemony's Gambit had failed. They had freed themselves from the laws of the Council, only to be consumed by the laws of the jungle. Their pride had been their shield. In the end, it was their tombstone. The story should end there. An empire erased, a people scattered. But there is one final, bitter irony to this tale. The Citadel, 2186. Commander Shepard is tracking the illegal use of old Batarian diplomatic codes. The trail leads to the refugee docks where a trap is sprung. The man holding the gun is a ghost from Shepard's past, Balak. The terrorist of Terra Nova survived, and with the complete collapse of the Hegemony's command structure, this mass-murdering extremist is now, by default, the highest-ranking military officer left in the entire Batarian race. His hatred for Shepard, for humanity, still burns. He blames Shepard for everything, for the Reapers, for the fall of Khar'shan, for the destruction of his people. His logic is twisted, paranoid, the perfect product of the Hegemony's teachings. He raises his pistol, ready to claim the vengeance he has craved for years.
We were a proud race, a beautiful race. Have you seen what the Reapers have done to us? I'm trapped on this Citadel. Our warships only know the locations of Reaper forces because I've tapped Council transmissions. I am the highest-ranking military officer left in the Hegemony, and I can't save my people. But I can end you.
And in this moment, the entire tragic, pathetic history of the Batarian Hegemony comes full circle. Shepard, the symbol of everything Balak despises, is the only one who can offer his people a shred of hope. Shepard is uniting the galaxy, the Krogan, the Turians, the only real chance anyone has. And Balak, the Beggar King, is forced to choose. He can have his petty vengeance and doom the last of his species, or he can swallow a lifetime of hate and beg his mortal enemy for help.
I'm uniting the Krogan and the Turians. We're the best hope for this galaxy. If you care about your people.
The great, proud Batarian Hegemony. Reduced to a terrorist handing over the broken remnants of his fleet to a human he tried to murder. He wanted to make Terra Nova an example. Instead, the Reapers made an example of Khar'shan. History is not written by the victors. It is written by the survivors. And the Batarians learned far too late that you cannot survive alone. Their isolation was not strength. It was a slow, self-inflicted death. A gamble they were destined to lose from the very beginning. The file is closed, but the network is always watching. Stay informed. Join us.